Merci d'être là ce matin. C'est chouette de se rassembler encore. Un sujet tellement important. Qui a apprécié hier soir? C'était chouette, non? It was very good. Donc, merci encore à toute l'équipe de Project Exodus d'être avec nous. Merci. Translate that word for him, Kerry. But yeah, we really appreciate you guys being here. Est-ce que je peux faire comme Conrad? Est-ce qu'on peut se lever? On va juste prier et après, I'll hand over to you. Donc, Seigneur, merci de l'opportunité. Merci que tu nous aimes, Seigneur. Comme un berger, tu viens chercher les brebis perdues. Tu es venu nous chercher et tu n'as pas terminé avec nous. Merci que tu veux nous guérir. Tu veux nous restaurer. Tu veux nous libérer, Seigneur. Tu veux qu'on s'épanouisse. C'est ton cœur de Père pour chacun de nous. Et je veux vraiment te remettre aujourd'hui. Viens nous équiper. Viens toucher nos cœurs, Seigneur. Je prie vraiment ta bénédiction sur tout ce qui se passe lors de cette journée. Au nom de Jésus-Christ. Amen. Amen. Over to you.
Good morning. I've been asked to open up in praise and worship this morning, but I think it's probably not a good idea. We can be enthusiastic about praise and worship, but not really good at it from my particular aspect. I think there's just one or two things that we want to just touch on first before we do go to praise and worship. And I would like to just ask you how last night was for you. How was last night for you? Good? Insightful? Insightful, you have to have another word. You can't take somebody else's word. Fantastic. Enthusiastic. Great. We can take all day. Why are there so many people sitting on this side and so few on this side? Is that the same place as yesterday? No. May I ask your help and support? Please, can you stand up? Please, can you pick maybe 5 or 6 people from that side and move them across onto this side? No, you can't ask who wants to move. You have to pick 5 people. No, now who's going to fill that row? Sometimes picking chairs can be a little bit more of a difficult thing than we think it is. I mean, we have no idea where we're going with this, but it's a good starting point. We have a small problem. We have an empty space over there now. Come look from here. You'll be able to see better. Was that said as the senior pastor or as the father? Organizational process. This is definitely taking longer than I thought it would. No. I feel like those 2 gentlemen maybe want to come back into the front over there at the back. Great. So good morning. Thank you again for last night. We enjoyed it. We were enthusiastic yet tired when we went home to our apartment. It really was a powerful evening for us. So we trust that for you, that you got to see a little bit of our hearts and a little bit of our character and our passion. It's really important that when we are called to do these things that our Father calls us to, it's really important that we do it to the best of our ability, which means we have to bring passion and excitement and enthusiasm into that area. On the right-hand side, you will see that there's a table with Project Exodus on it with multiple different kind of books or program structures. It is for you to observe and ask questions to see, but it is an example of some of the programs that we work with. So we will be leaving a large number of those together with Fred and Vanessa for the church to be able to review and to go through. But if you wouldn't personally take any, that would be great. If you have questions, we will have time and opportunity to certainly unpack it. We would also encourage you to make sure that you're here for Tuesday evening as well, because there's some great training and techniques that come from that. Cool. Thanks, guys.
Good morning. Good morning. 1, 2. There we go.
Tu deviennes paix, les tempes qui m'entourent se taisent à ton nom comme par la mer ou comme rage à moi ou comme chaque vague à ton nom Jésus, Jésus. Tu fais trembler les ténèbres, Jésus, Jésus. Tu brises la peur, Jésus, Jésus. Tu fais trembler les ténèbres, Jésus, Jésus. Souffle que ces eaux se revivent, que cette voix chante à nouveau. Je louerai Jésus, Jésus. Tu fais trembler les ténèbres, Jésus, Jésus. Tu brises la peur, Jésus, Jésus. Tu fais trembler les ténèbres, Jésus, Jésus. Ton nom, une lumière que les ombres ne peuvent nier. Ton nom ne peut te régaler. Ton nom est vivant, peut toujours élever. Ton nom peut être régalé. Ton nom, une lumière que les ombres ne peuvent nier. Ton nom ne peut être régalé. Ton nom est vivant, pour toujours élevé. Ton nom ne peut être régalé. Jésus, Jésus, tu fais trembler les ténèbres. Jésus, Jésus, tu brises la peur. Jésus, Jésus, tu fais trembler les ténèbres. Jésus, Jésus. Jésus, Jésus, tu fais trembler les ténèbres. Jésus, Jésus, tu brises la peur. Jésus, Jésus, tu fais trembler les ténèbres. Jésus, Jésus.
I searched the world, but it couldn't fill me. Man's empty praise treasures the faith never enough. You came along and pulled me back together. Every desire's now satisfied here in your love. Oh, there's nothing better than you, Lord. There's nothing better than you, Lord. There's nothing, nothing is better than you. I'm not afraid to show you my weakness, my failures and flaws. Lord, you've seen them all, and you still call me friend. 'Cause the God of the mountain is the God of the valley. There's not a place your mercy and grace won't find me again. Oh, there's nothing better than you, Lord. There's nothing better than you, Lord. There's nothing, nothing is better than you. Lord, there's nothing better than you. Oh, there's nothing better than you. There's nothing, nothing is better than you. Oh, you turn mourning to dancing. You give beauty for ashes. You turn shame into glory. You're the only one who can. You turn graves into gardens. You turn bones into armies. You turn seas into highways. You're the only one who can. You're the only one who can. Lord, there's nothing better than you. Oh, there's nothing better than you. Lord, there's nothing, nothing is better than you. Lord, there's nothing better than you. Lord, there's nothing better than you. Lord, there's nothing, nothing is better than you.
Father, there's absolutely nothing that's better than you. Nothing that's more important than you. As we come before you with your presence this morning, we just want to glorify your holy name, to sing out your praises, that you allow us the strength to show you our weaknesses, to bring our weaknesses before you, to be authentic, to be trusting in the community, to be trusting in one another, under your presence. So, Father, we thank you for today. We commit it into your hands that nothing will be too much or too far for you. In your presence we pray. Amen. At least I wasn't the only one that wasn't getting that to work well. We remind ourselves as we are talking around the principles of comprehending addiction and understanding their process behind us. And if I can just give a scripture, which for us and for me personally speaks so much into why we do what we do. By reason of the exceeding greatness of the revelation that I should not be exalted excessively, a thorn in the flesh was given to me, a messenger of Satan to torment me, that I should not be exalted excessively. Concerning this thing, I begged the Lord 3 times that it might depart from me. I know there's some folk that are here today that have cried out to our Father, just take this thing away from me. It's enough. I can't do this anymore. I don't want to do it anymore. Take it away from me. I begged the Lord 3 times that it might depart from me. He said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in your weakness. Most gladly, therefore, I will rather glorify in my weakness, that the power of the Christ may rest upon me. It's an important process, is that it's almost like a conditional so that process, that to have the power of Christ resting upon me. I mean, who wouldn't want the authority of the creator of the universe's mantle of authority to be sitting upon you? Who wouldn't want that? But there is a section that goes before that, is that I need to acknowledge my weakness, my humanness, the challenges that I face, and the process that I can be authentic and transparent. And that's one of the reasons we really love that song, the courage to bring our weakness before you, so that his strength can be perfected in us. That's what it's about, because surely we have been left to do greater works than our Savior. So for me personally, perhaps a little bit, a short minute or two of my story is that I am in recovery by God's grace in its entirety for 24 and a half years. I battled in addiction for over 20 years. It took everything away from me in every possible way. I was molested as a young guy, got introduced to pornography as a young person, and that started the high-risk behavior, the ability to not care and not to make decisions correctly. Of course, we only got to realize that later on in my life, after having been shot, after having been gone through the worst stories, and that's not what the testimony is about. It's not about the depth of the darkness. We all get to experience that for ourselves. But on the 2nd of January 2000, I cried out again that I couldn't do it anymore. I didn't want to live. I wanted to die. I had tried to die unsuccessfully. And I woke up on the 2nd of January 2000, and I turned on the television. There's a great South African preacher called Ray McCauley who was preaching. And I walked out of a crack house. I hitched a lift. The people stopped. They said, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm going to church." And they said, "So are we." And as I got in the car, I told them my story, and they gave me money, which was a really bad thing to do. Don't give guys who are battling with substance abuse and related disorders money. And I stopped the car, and I got out, and I turned to go back to Hillbrow. And in that time, a second vehicle stopped and said, we feel like we should just offer you a lift. Where are you going? And I said, well, I guess I'm going to church. And they said, wonderful, we're going to Ray McCauley at Rhema Church. And that's where I gave my life that morning and started developing a recovery journey and a recovery story, which has gone on to change my life and change the process of what I do and how we do it. And we built a treatment center that we ran and established for 17 odd years. It became a flagship treatment center in South Africa. And in fact, we offer treatment to many people throughout the world. We have guys from, only one or two from France, but a lot from England and Ireland and various other processes at a very big facility. And I was able to serve on the Central Drug Authority, which is the advisory board to Minister of Social Development in South Africa. I'm going too fast. Yeah. Sometimes it gets exciting and fearful to tell of the glory that happens. Needless to say that in 2014, I felt called that how do we take what we know to work, but to be obedient to create something new in accordance with, behold, I'm doing a new thing. And that's when we started Project Exodus in terms of trying out the groups and working out the groups. So as we step into the second part of comprehending addiction, graves into gardens, treasures that fade, we really want you to engage with not only bringing it forth from yesterday, but also with what Karen's going to be bringing through this morning. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Bonjour. My name is Karen, and I'm very grateful to be in recovery from a substance addiction. 15 years in active addiction and lost everything. Drugs pretty much destroyed my life a few times. I used to be a teacher in Cape Town. Addiction took that from me. It took a lot of money. It took my family relationships away from me. It took my sanity, which I always say is one of the most damaging consequences at the time, to lose one's sanity and also self-respect and self-worth. And so those are actually some of the most significant things I think that I lost during that time, was those really important values and, just valuing myself. 10 years ago, after having tried recovery many different ways in kind of traditional fellowships, I would get clean for a while and things would look good on the outside, but nothing really changed on the inside. So ultimately, I would go back to using. And then 10 years ago, it was 2014, I had really, really hit rock bottom again. And my family, who have been through a lot, said, here's one last chance. You can go to this treatment center. It was in KwaZulu-Natal, which is very far away from Cape Town. And but you will go for a year, and it's a Christian center. And I was not a Christian at the time, very anti, and I didn't really have another option. It was kind of that or the street. And so I said, okay, well, what option do I have? And off I went. It was a very, it was a proper treatment center. It wasn't a luxurious treatment center. We did proper treatment, we did proper work, and it was a really God-centered culture. And I can't identify a specific time when my heart and mind changed, but over that time, God did a work in me. And I have been in recovery ever since that time, and been blessed to then volunteer in that center and then join the Project Exodus team. And I've really loved being part of taking everything that I have learned in treatment and being able to make it available to as many people as possible through the church. Because I really believe that not a treatment or effective treatment shouldn't be reserved for those that can afford a private facility. It should be available for everyone, and the church really is the vehicle to replicate that and to roll that out. So that's a little bit about me. Just to say that in recovery, all those things have been restored, I believe. Sometimes still working on self-worth. I think that's a long-term project. But definitely family relationships have been restored. My nieces and nephew only know me in recovery. Nephews and nieces only know me in recovery, which is beautiful. Those relationships have been restored. Thankfully, I'm employed again. Yeah, those things, my self-respect has been restored, and my sanity, almost all of it, I think, probably 75%. Debatable. Right, so last night, Josh introduced us to the iceberg model, which helps us to understand addiction as a product of much more pervasive and multifaceted issues. We looked at how those common signs and symptoms of addiction, so loss of control, compulsion, preoccupation, progression, are really just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the entire problem. Beneath the waterline, we have a whole lot of stuff that's going on. A whole lot of dysfunctional mechanisms that have been put in place over the course of a lifetime, and we call those maladaptive mechanisms. I'm not sure how we got to that, because it is a bit of a tongue twister, but it describes what they are. So they're kind of entrenched biopsychosocial structures that are not healthy, so they are maladaptive. And each of us experiences different and unique maladaptive mechanisms, but as Josh mentioned, there are some that are more common, and in this session we will look at a few of those. Just a disclaimer that this is not an exhaustive, it's a hard English word that. It's not a full comprehensive list. There's so many more things that we could put beneath the waterline, but this is just an insight into a few of them. And there is further information in your workbooks, so you can read a little bit more at home. So one of the most prevalent maladaptive mechanisms is something called denial. And denial is a psychological defense mechanism that our brain uses to protect us from distress. So it kind of works according to that principle of what I don't know can't hurt me. And it rejects painful realities. So things that would be really difficult or distressing for us to deal with, denial blocks out. And the result is that we have a subjective disbelief in the truth, even where there might be a lot of objective evidence to the contrary. So we see denial at work in, breathe, okay, she says I must slow down, okay? So we see denial at work in a substance user who can't see their own unmanageability. We see it in a supporter, for example, who can't recognize that their behavior might also be unhealthy in relation to their loved one in addiction. We see it in perhaps a pornography user that can't relate their pornography use to their marriage problems. Those are some of the instances where we see denial. So what makes denial especially tricky is that it's a subconscious mechanism, so it operates outside of our immediate awareness. And so when we're in denial, we don't know that we're in denial, and that can be problematic. And I'm sure you've experienced that, where you've interacted with people where you can see that they have a problem, but they absolutely cannot see that they have a problem. That's denial at work. So it's not straightforward or absolute denial. The self-deception, it exists in various degrees and different forms. So some of the ways that denial manifests is simple denial. So simple denial is just straightforward denial of the existence of a problem. There's nothing wrong with my behavior, would be a statement of simple denial. But then we get things like minimizing. So where we are acknowledging that there's a problem, but we deny the severity of the problem. So we would say something like, my problem isn't that bad. Or I might, yes, I drink a little bit too much, but it's not out of control. That would be minimizing. We get control fallacy. So that's where we overestimate our own level of control in relation to a problematic behavior. So all I have to do to get my problem under control is drink beer instead of vodka, for example. Or I can manage my problem myself. So I understand that I have a problem, but I can manage it. I can manage my drinking if I only drink on the weekends. So we try to self-manage the problem. And we get rationalizing, and that's where we justify the problem through kind of reassuring excuses and explanations for our behavior. And this kind of links a lot into flawed beliefs, which we'll look at next. And the kind of statements there, using weed helps me to manage my anxiety. Or I'm a much more relaxed person when I drink. I need to watch pornography to satisfy myself sexually because I have a really high sex drive, for example. So we're excusing that behavior. It sounds rational, but it's not actually. There's blame shifting. Whew, and this is a really, you'll encounter this a lot with people in active addiction. And this is where we recognize that we have a problem, but we don't take personal responsibility for it. Or we excuse our behavior as someone else's fault or as a response to a situation. So we might have, I only behave this way because of how you make me feel. Or I use pornography because I'm not sexually satisfied in my marriage. That would be blame shifting. And then the last two, compartmentalizing. So that's where we split our lives and selves into two separate components. So in the one box, I'm a teacher and I have certain values and morals that go in line with that. And then on the other side, I have my using self that has a completely different set of values, and those two things aren't congruent, so they don't line up. So for example, pornography is something that I do, but it's not who I really am. So there's a dissonance there between those two roles or two behaviors. And then we get comparing, where we kind of conclude that our problem can't be that bad because of how it compares to the problems of others. So, well, I can't be addicted, I'm not homeless. Or everyone's on social media and everyone uses too much social media. And so because of how we're comparing it to others, we're able to deny that we actually have a problem. So we can recognize denial verbally. You will hear verbal statements in which simple denial, minimizing, rationalizing, all of these are evident. But we can also recognize it in some behavioral manifestations. So when we press into denial, we'll normally get quite a violent or aggressive response or an avoidant response. An avoidant response is when we confront an issue and someone tries to deflect with humor or intimidation or perhaps just a load of information that deflects attention away from the actual issue. And then we also get a kind of defensive response in which we press into denial and there's a retaliation. So that person is closing out any other perspectives, and usually that will come with heightened emotions. It will come with retaliation, sometimes aggression. And so these are ways to identify when we are coming into a space where denial is present. So the problem with denial is that when we are in denial, our self-defeating habits are likely to continue. This is because when we are minimizing the distress that we experience, or when denial does that, it blinds us to the damage that a behavior or a situation is causing. And so we're not motivated to change because we don't see the need for change. If we don't recognize that we have a problem, or we're minimizing it, or we're rationalizing it, or we're compartmentalizing, the motivation to change is diminished. Remembering that a change process has to be self-motivated. A genuine change process needs to be self-motivated. And usually we move into a place where we're ready to change, where we start to see the benefits, well, first of all, the need and the benefits of change. If we can't see that, we're going to lack the motivation, and then the change process is hindered. All right, so we're going to move on to flawed beliefs. And I love this. I really believe this is such a critical part of addiction cycles being sustained. And flawed beliefs are those core convictions that we hold that we believe are true that actually are not true. So, or they are inaccurate. And when our beliefs are flawed, we tend to then behave in ways that are dysfunctional. So if we look at the cognitive behavioral model, which links beliefs, thoughts, emotions, behavior, and then consequently our experiences, we see that if we have a flawed belief, we're likely to have negative thoughts, quite uncomfortable emotions, dysfunctional behaviors, and then negative experiences that reinforce our flawed beliefs. So if we look at an example, if I believe that no one understands me, for example, it's likely that I'm going to feel isolated. I'm going to have thoughts about being isolated. I'm going to have feelings of loneliness and despondency and perhaps depression. And this increases the likelihood that I might resort to self-medicating behaviors, like, for example, watching pornography. And then as I use pornography more, I become more isolated. And so that only reinforces the belief that no one really understands me. And that's how the cognitive behavioral cycle works. Some common beliefs that underpin dysfunctional cycles: I can't cope. I truly, truly, truly believed that my drug of choice helped me to cope with life, even when it was causing so many severe problems. I continued to believe that my drug of choice helped me in some way, because I believed that I couldn't cope on my own. Some other beliefs: I can't change. I can't manage the way other people do. I don't have anything to offer. I'm not worthy. I'm a failure. And those are just a few examples of many flawed beliefs that could be underpinning cycles of addiction and dysfunction. In particular, flawed beliefs that set up using as an effective coping strategy are extremely powerful contributors to cycles of addiction. And what I was describing now about my personal experience, that was a flawed belief about using being an effective coping strategy. And you will often see this in cycles of addiction. These are the beliefs that my drug or behavior of choice helps me to somehow do better or feel better. Like drinking helps me to relax, anxiety helps me to manage, weed helps me to manage my anxiety, pornography satisfies my sexual urges, or cocaine helps me to be more creative and confident. And often these beliefs are established very early on during phases of what we call exposure and experimentation. So these are our first kind of experiences with a behavior or a substance. And in the initial phases, using isn't a problem yet. It presents as a solution to a problem or a perceived problem. So we may have an experience where it provides us with relief from depression, or it helps us to cope with a certain emotion in the moment, or we feel more confident, we can overcome social anxiety. And so we get this situation where behavior becomes tied to this idea of coping. And with repeated experience, those flawed beliefs become entrenched until eventually they are so much part of our makeup that they continue to persist even when problems start to arise. The belief is more powerful than the evidence that's proving otherwise. And so dismantling those flawed beliefs in recovery is absolutely critical. Otherwise, we're going to go back when we are triggered and we believe that our using can provide us with some kind of relief or way to cope with that situation. We will go back unless we've dismantled the flawed beliefs. Kind of related to this idea of flawed coping, this perceived coping, is coping skills. So we often see that cycles of addiction are sustained by poor coping skills. So perhaps we haven't developed ways to effectively cope with life, and we've adopted dysfunctional coping strategies. When we experience stress or trauma in life, we either respond positively, so in adaptive ways, or in maladaptive ways. And if we have good coping skills, we're going to be resilient in the face of stress and trauma. But if we don't have good coping skills, we might go another route. We might use a dysfunctional coping strategy. So when we have well-developed coping skills, we are resilient. On the other hand, undeveloped coping skills make it more difficult for us to cope with life. So some common coping difficulties, we get issues with identifying, expressing, and regulating emotions. Big one. Setting healthy boundaries, navigating relationships, resolving conflict, managing stress, controlling impulses, and processing trauma. So these are all things that we need to look at in recovery to equip ourselves and empower ourselves better. In particular, if we have undeveloped coping skills in relation to our emotional intelligence, this can contribute towards addictive cycles. When we talk about emotional intelligence or EQ, what we're talking about is the ability to identify, express, and manage our emotions effectively. So ability to identify and to emotionally regulate. And if we're not able to emotionally regulate, we're more prone to impulsive behavior, to self-medicating, while as we're trying to adjust those emotions, but in a dysfunctional way. When we're caught up in addictive cycles, the brain is also affected in several different ways. Chronic use of substances, so that means long-term use of substances and addictive behaviors, damages the prefrontal cortex, as we saw from Kerry's presentation last night. And that's the area of the brain that's responsible for executive functions, so higher order functions like impulse control, decision-making. And so when that area of the brain is compromised, we are more prone to impulsivity and compulsivity and so forth. Additionally, the brain's reward system becomes hijacked when we are in active addiction. And when we look at a non-using brain, when we do things that are important for our survival and good for us, like eating, sleeping, having sex, in relationship, experiencing love, feel-good hormones are released in the brain, and that teaches the brain, this is a really good thing to do. You should do this often because it helps you to survive. But when we use substances or pornography, for example, there's an artificial surge of these feel-good chemicals in the brain. And over time, this teaches us, this is the most important thing that you should be doing for your survival. And so we can become biologically compelled to seek out our drug or behavior of choice as if it's essential to our existence. And that explains why you'll see people in addiction doing the most irrational things, stealing from family, selling themselves, whatever it takes to get their drug of choice, because they're actually biologically compelled at that point. Their body and brain believes that I need to do this in order to survive. We can also get from this situation something that's called anhedonia, which means that our brain is unable to regulate its own reward system. And so less of these feel-good chemicals are released naturally, which results in a situation where we can't experience natural pleasure, and we're having to find relief, find pleasure and enjoyment. We can only do that over time from our drug or behavior of choice. And then a common misplaced solution is obviously to escalate our use. So the substance and behavior causes the problem in the first place, but our solution is I'm going to keep upping my use to try and regulate the system, which is dysregulated. And then neurologically, when we do things often, strong neural pathways are laid down in the brain related to an activity. So if we frequently use pornography to self-medicate when we're feeling frustrated, strong neural pathways are laid down in relation to that activity. And over time, those neural pathways become so strongly established that this becomes our default response to certain stimuli. So to use the example, when faced with a trigger, an emotional trigger that we've typically dealt with in a dysfunctional way, we're likely to do the same thing again. So we feel frustrated or we feel stressed, because we've always turned to pornography, we're likely to do that again. So we turn back to pornography to kind of self-regulate. It becomes an automatic response. And we can think of neural pathways like those well-trodden paths through a forest. We kind of end up following that path by default because that's the path that has been carved out. It's like the familiar route of least resistance, and so we easily slip into that behavior. We know that spiritual disconnection or negative spirituality is an undeniable contributor to cycles of addiction. When we live disconnected from the spirit, our minds become set on what the flesh desires. And instead of worshiping God, we now make other temporal aspects of life the focus of our kind of devotion. And actually, the word addict means devoted to, which is quite interesting because we are actually, this substance or behavior is what becomes the object of our devotion. When we don't have God's word to guide us, our priorities and our values obviously become warped. When I think back on the values and the way that I viewed things, it's so vastly different from what I can accept as truth now. Absolutely polar opposites. And God's word did not make sense to me. I couldn't see the truth in it. And that just shows that, the warpedness of my values at the time, I couldn't see that truth at all. And then we have, obviously, separation from God, which leaves us kind of purposeless and aimless. We've got this hole in the soul. We're trying to fill it in futile ways. And we're spiritually unfit. So we don't have any defense against any attack, any oppression from the enemy. We have nothing. We have no armor. The disempowerment of shame is also critical when it comes to cycles of addiction. And shame is different to guilt. Guilt is what we feel about something that we've done, whereas shame is who we believe we are, what we believe about ourselves. So shame might say, guilt might say, I've done something wrong, but shame says, I am wrong. And shame is tied to those really profound feelings of inadequacy and inferiority and low self-worth and statements, I'm worthless. When we get shame that exists chronically in a protracted way, it can be extremely unproductive. It negatively affects our self-worth and our mental health, and it's connected with dysfunctional coping strategies. Often when we look at shame, it's actually connected to unprocessed trauma. When we're not able to process a trauma, we internalize it, and it becomes a source of mental and emotional discomfort. And we can start to get to a place of self-blame. The self-blame takes root, and we start to believe that we are inherently flawed. And then we may come to see ourselves as bad, unworthy, incapable of achieving anything of value. We can also get shame from a lack of authenticity. So if I'm using pornography and I'm not being honest and authentic about my struggle, shame can also develop in that situation or scenario. And where I'm unable to control undesirable behaviors, shame can take root. When we're trying to keep what we're doing or what's been done to us hidden, self-loathing and shame intensifies. It's a place where shame breeds. When we disempower shame, we're needing to bring that out into the light. So out of hiding and secrecy and isolation, where it can be dealt with in a non-judgmental and compassionate space. And then shame's not the only negative value that needs to be addressed in recovery, because when we are caught up in addictive cycles, we're not only using, we're also immersed in what we call a culture of addiction. So culture is a way of life, right? It's the beliefs that beliefs and behaviors that we accept as normal for ourselves and for a group of people. And the culture of addiction is characterized by a whole lot of negative values like disorder, low self-worth, shame, dishonesty, a lack of authenticity, secrecy, self-neglect, negative spirituality, spiritual disconnection, rebellion, escapism. So there are all these negative values, and that becomes the culture that we're actually living in. And these values, they normalize, and sometimes they even encourage using as a coping mechanism or as a way of dealing with life. So you'll hear us speak a lot about a movement from that culture of addiction into a culture of recovery. And in the culture of recovery, the values are the opposite. So where there's disorder, there's order. Where there's denial, there's truth. Where there is secrecy, there's transparency. And we're needing to step into the culture of addiction, into the culture of recovery with both feet, because trying to sustain recovery while I've got one foot still in the culture of addiction is bound to fail, because the culture of addiction pulls us back in. It's powerful in that way. It can suck us back in very quickly. So in this session, we've looked at some of the maladaptive mechanisms that underpin the cycles of addiction. You can find further information in your manuals, and there are a few more that will be mentioned throughout the training, so stay tuned. Remember that what the iceberg model tells us, or teaches us, is that simply interrupting the cycle of addiction, so abstinence without change, is never going to lead to long-term recovery, ever. Might work for a little while, but ultimately we will go back to using, and there's a very well-known saying in recovery circles, in AA and NA, if nothing changes, nothing changes, because we will ultimately go back if the same mechanisms are in play. So what's required is simultaneous radical change beneath the surface. Those maladaptive mechanisms that have been maintaining our dysfunction, they need to be identified, they need to be addressed, and they need to be replaced with healthy, adaptive alternatives, life-giving alternatives. And that is the essence of a meaningful and sustainable recovery process, which we're going to learn more about in the next session from Sade. Thank you. Merci. No, it's not a video now.
Bonjour. Following in Carrie's footsteps is Jamapal Sade. It's so great to be with all of you in Paris. As Carrie mentioned, it's some of our first time overseas, so first time leaving South Africa. And it's been such a gift to just walk the streets of Paris and experience your cuisine and your culture and your city. It's so incredibly beautiful. And it's a true gift of recovery as well. and a fruit of recovery. And I can tell you that growing up in a dysfunctional home with two parents who were caught up in addiction and who sadly died in their addiction, they didn't get to experience the joy of recovery that we get to share with you, and that hope that you guys get to share with others. It is a true gift to be standing here this morning and to be able to share some of our heart with you guys, but also to share on what it is to turn graves into gardens, and what does that recovery journey look like, and how do we take the words, and how do we take our stories and our personal journeys, and how do we take that and help others. So in South Africa, we love to tell stories. Stories help us to connect, right? It helps us to be vulnerable, helps us to identify ourselves and someone else. So there's a guy, he spent 22 years in active addiction. He gave away his family, his dignity, his self-worth, and he gave away his freedom of choice. His addiction led him to criminal activities, jail cells, multiple rehab attempts, living on the streets for over a year. He was known as dishonest, unreliable, unpredictable, but God. Through God, he led his whole family to salvation. He qualified as a recovery coach. He helps multiple people in recovery. He is now 6 years clean. He is a devoted father, a loving husband, and he's my husband. And our story is proof that no matter how dire the situation may seem, that recovery is possible and achievable for all of us. So when we talk about recovery, we are talking about a restoration from dysfunction to wellness and wholeness. So we're not wanting to go back to a person that we were. It's actually about finding wholeness and freedom in the person we're meant to be. So although recovery often relates to addictive disorders, drinking, drugs, pornography, it can also be applied to addressing many mental health concerns as well. So unhealthy behaviors, the way in which we behave with one another, the way in which we think, the way our mind maybe controls us. So the word recovery refers to the process of reclaiming something that was lost or stolen. And as Karen mentioned, in addiction, we lose a lot. Our families lose a lot. However, reclaiming possession of who we were and what we had in the past is not the point. Rather, we are seeking something far greater, our God-given identities, and reach our full potential in the person that we were meant to be when we were formed. So this way, recovery is likened to that of a journey of discovery. So to make it easy to take things away from the training, we are going to do the recovery journey in 6 easy taglines that we can jot down and that we can take with us. Okay. It's like a highlight reel. Okay, so the first one, as I mentioned, is recovery is for everyone. It is achievable and it is possible. And it's not for only those who can afford private treatment. And it doesn't exclude the homeless, the jobless, and the helpless. With sufficient support, recovery is possible and achievable. The old adage of once an addict, always an addict, we believe is simply not true in God's eyes. We can be transformed and we can be renewed. And new life can be found in recovery. We do not have to accept this fate of chronic relapse over our lives and over our loved ones. Okay, so 2 is abstinence plus radical change. Can everybody say radical? That wasn't really radical. Can we try again? Radical. Awesome. So we need abstinence. It's a foundational part of recovery, right? I need to be clean I need to abstain from pornography. I need to not be drinking. I need to not be using drugs or whatever it is that is hindering me. But that alone does not equate recovery. They are not the same. So as Karen mentioned, the maladaptive mechanisms, that's what underpins our addiction, right? So I need to dismantle those in order to break free from those cycles of dysfunctional behaviors. So without change, those mechanisms remain intact, ultimately leading me back to using. So in order to achieve a satisfying, sustainable recovery, I need to replace them with healthy alternatives. And that's where the radical change comes in place, the personal transformation. Okay, so when we talk about radical change, we're talking about something that happens on an intrinsic level, something that's known as a paradigm shift. In our groups, we have a little west to east sign. So everyone give me a west to, this is our little guys. Okay, you're right. So our transgressions are removed as far as the east is the west. The east is from the west. Okay, so that's what we're doing. We're moving. My life is on this trajectory in dysfunction, and I'm doing a full 180 degree, completely new and renewed. So as Karen mentioned, some of the ways that I can take these maladaptive mechanisms and replace them with healthy alternatives is dealing with my trauma, is replacing my denial with truth. It's replacing the hole in my soul with a spiritual connection and a relationship with our Father. Embracing a culture of recovery. Sometimes that may even need me to separate from toxic environments. Perhaps I have to be removed in order for change to take place. Okay, so radical change, it's radical, but it doesn't happen on its own. And it takes work. So I know that my husband put a lot of work into his addiction. a lot of work. So his recovery required a lot of work as well. Doesn't happen on its own. I have to put in significant work. I have to work a program that leads me on a journey of personal change. It's a process, something that tells me, okay, step here. Okay, now you're going here. Do this. It helps me along. I'm walking into a journey of unknown to create this new life for myself. So any athletes, if we were in South Africa, I'd say comrades, but, okay, so if I am any Olympians? Yeah, right, so fitness, right? I'm on a fitness regime. I've got a plan. If I just stop for a few days or a few weeks, am I going to be at that same level of fitness than if I was to do it every single day? Probably not. So the same is for my recovery. I don't just get to be, maybe today I don't want to be in recovery. I want to take a day off. It requires that consistency. It requires me to work at it in a committed way. Okay, so Galatians 5:1, it's for freedom's sake that we've been set free, but it's my responsibility to remain free and not be burdened again by the yoke of slavery. A recovery program helps me to stand firm and to put more and more distance from where I was to where I'm going. It's important to keep in mind that being set free, being delivered, is not the same as remaining free. Okay? So even if I'm to experience a supernatural release from the bondage that I've been in my life, which we know is possible through the power of our Father, it's my responsibility to continue to work that out through a recovery program, through a process, through being committed, through support system. So we can think of this as a process of sanctification. It takes place over a lifetime. Recovery is not a destination, but a journey. So some of the components that could make up a recovery program are abstinence, as we touched on, a lifestyle change, a routine, where things have been so disordered in addiction, like Karen said, we now bring order into our lives. We work a purposeful personal development, dealing with our traumas, learning how to get coping skills, learning how to interact with others. We equip ourselves with knowledge and skills. We have intentional spiritual growth. And we plant ourselves in a community that is both empowering and supportive. Four, hope you taking notes, test. There's a test at the end. No. Okay, so recovery works best with a plan. Right? If I'm going to go for a hike in mountains or wherever, in the Alps, in Paris, we went into the woodlands near where we were, the Arc de Triomphe, that you need a map. Or the catacombs for, what you need a map? Anyway, if I'm going to go anywhere in the unknown, in the wilderness, or on an adventure, I need a plan. I need something that's going to tell me this is the way to go. So recovery is obviously the most successful when there's a guided path for me to follow. This path helps in all areas of life so that we may become successful not only in our recovery, but in our relationships, in our jobs, in our communities. Recovery works best with a plan. At Project Exodus, we have developed a storehouse of resources for planning, managing, maintaining, growing one's recovery. The one with all the pictures of the resources. Yeah. Guided path, step by step, helps me along. I don't need to be guessing. I don't need to be wondering what to do next. There's a storehouse and there's programs and plans in place for all of us. Okay, 5. Recovery progress is a process. Okay. Recovery doesn't happen overnight. Rome wasn't built in a day, right? Okay, so society has maybe said that recovery is achievable within just a few short weeks. 28 days, 21 days, if anyone's familiar with treatment. But psychologically and neurologically, it takes at least 90 days for the brain to renew or start to rewire itself. If I have put my body through trauma, through pain, through addiction, it's going to take a lot longer than that to be emotionally healed, physically healed, spiritually healed. In relation to this, it's important that we are able to manage our expectations, both of ourselves and of our loved ones. So if my expectations are too low, I may lack motivation to continue on hard days. But if my expectations are too high, I may lose hope when things get a little difficult. So this is why we must be aware that the progress of recovery is not time dependent. Okay, we go through stages, but they are not linked to time. It can be tempting to assume that someone must be in a stable recovery if they've been there for many years. But clean time is not, doesn't equate to where I am in the stage of recovery. Authentic recovery is evidenced in a person's behavior, right? So its actions are louder than words. Is my behavior, is the way that I present, is the way that I do things in recovery congruent with a culture of recovery? Or does it speak to a culture of addiction? So Karen mentioned a bit about what makes up the culture of addiction. And we're wanting to take these negative values associated with addiction into a lifestyle that is characterized by positive principles associated with recovery. You can go to the next one. Okay, so gratitude, authenticity, self-respect, ownership, self-care. These are the characteristics that I want to surround myself in. Okay, last one. Recovery is each person's own responsibility. Okay, so recovery is very much about ownership. I cannot do somebody else's recovery for them. Trust me, tried many years. Tried and tested, not possible. True story. So we cannot force anybody to change, nor should we take on the responsibility of saving them. If we find ourselves working harder at somebody else's recovery, we are probably in a dysfunctional situation. So there are things that we can do that provides an environment that is conducive to the culture of recovery. We can empower, right? We can provide support groups. We can facilitate conversations. But we cannot take on another's recovery. Without personal ownership, the process is unlikely to be successful. And sometimes personal ownership takes a while to catch up to my words that I want recovery. Sometimes the ownership takes a while. It's on the next train. Taking responsibility looks like doing what it takes to achieve and sustain lifelong recovery without relying on others to do what I can do for myself. Others to do for me what I can do for myself. Okay, so recap. Recovery is for everyone, right? We agree? Recovery requires abstinence plus radical change. Radical. Recovery takes work. Recovery works best with a plan. Oui. Recovery progress is a process. And recovery is my own responsibility. So in the next session, we will unpack how to enhance recovery and effectively enhance recovery in your church community and beyond. Merci. Oh, jammer. That's Afrikaans for sorry. We're going to watch a video. Désolé.
Full of frustration and confusion, full of liberation and gratitude.
Messy and hopeless, a message of hope.
From scared and alone to brave and connected.
None alive.
Insane. Sound mind.
For too many years I was selfish. I've changed my life and I am now generous and loving.
Enslaved, liberated. My life was dark. Now it is bright every day.
Broken, broke, damaged. Alive, fresh, focused.
I was trapped in the darkness and broke free into the light.
It's now Gareth.
Slight delay. Hello, everyone. Bonjour. Salut. I was told an interesting thing by Vanessa when we arrived yesterday, and that is, in South Africa, we say, hi, how are you, to anybody we know, meet. Yet in France, it seems it's not the case. It's actually only when you get to know somebody that you ask them how they are. And I find that quite refreshing, because actually in South Africa, we ask somebody how they are without really wanting the answer anyway. So I think just to touch a little bit on me briefly before I get into the session. As I said, I didn't say, my name is Gareth. I have 2 sons, wife. My sons are 24 and 33. And I am still amazed as to why I'm here in Paris right now, and looking back at my recovery journey and my wife's and our life and lifestyle before, it's quite something that you never know what God is going to do in your heart, or in my heart, and in the lives of myself and my family, and for you here today. So I just encourage you to open your hearts and ears to Yeshua, and I think he's going to do something fantastic and incredible in Paris and beyond. So it's a real honor and privilege to be here. Thank you. Thank you for your hospitality. We were told the French weren't that friendly, but I disagree. So thank you. I didn't want to step into a recovery journey at all. My wife, we led sort of quite a lifestyle in Durban and in Johannesburg of drinking and parties. I never became an addict, which is arguable amongst the team. I think Karen touched on denial earlier, and maybe I'm suffering from a bit of that. My wife, though, she is the problem child. And just on that, though, I blamed everything that went wrong. And it was easy for me to hide my dysfunction and my problems, or any challenges I had in terms of behavior and things, behind her addiction. So it was sort of hid underneath that, and often my behavior sort of became unchecked in that space. My wife joined recovery. She was in recovery about 3 years, and she kept saying, no, come to group. She actually was at one of Conrad's first initial groups in the church. And I always pulled back. My theory was that, no, she must go and get fixed, and then come back, and we can kind of carry on maybe where we left off with our lifestyle. Yet, what I noticed was quite staggering, is that she put away her old self to a large degree, yet started gaining new friends, gaining new life, gaining a joy in her heart, and a thrill for life that I hadn't seen before, whereas before she had just numbed with using and in addiction. And I think I was quite resentful that how can my wife now, after being in addiction, now suddenly have this whole new life and be better than ever with new friends, and I was stuck. So she was kind of way ahead. I was stuck in this place of wherever I was, and not changing, not moving anywhere. So on one of the groups, Tracy was sharing her testimony, and she kind of really asked me, she didn't beg, but she really encouraged me to attend, and I did so. And then we attended a training, much like this, but in South Africa. And it was after that that I really got, number one, interested in running a group and facilitating a group, which was 6 months still to come, but in actually stepping into the recovery program and into a recovery group. I'm cutting into time, and it was then that I really found a voice for myself, a voice for me, although I didn't use it for about six weeks into groups. I never said a word, I never shared anything, but eventually Kerry and Sade pulled out of me what was needed. But I really started to be able to see my dysfunction as what we term a supporter or a loved one of someone in addiction. And I realized my part in the terms of that family dynamic, bearing in mind we had Kyle, my oldest son, and Max, our younger son, in the mix at that time as well, who obviously their lives were what's the word? Affected. Yes, thanks, Kerry. My son entered into addiction and is also on the road of recovery and doing really well. So I really thank God for that. The church is the hope of the world. And as Conrad said last night, if we're not going to address the issue of addiction in society, who will? And I think the church has such power in that space, and groups has the ability to do that and roll that out. So in this session, we'll look at ways that the church, that you, as individuals, can invite, support, and sustain recovery in your community. Establishing a culture of recovery in a church is not just about having hosting a group at the sort of back end of the church, where it's really undercover and so on, and run by a completely separate organization. Rather, it's about growing ministries dedicated to restoration and recovery. Ministries that are sustainable, so not sort of one-hit wonder, or excuse the inappropriate pun, ministries in which leaders in the church are fully invested. It's about creating a culture in which those battling addiction are accepted and not stigmatized. Prodigals are welcomed. Individuals and families are empowered to actually work a recovery program, not just support their loved one in addiction. And through this, restoration is celebrated. We keep talking about culture, and something when Karen was speaking earlier, something triggered something in me, and I've been going on the trains here, is I would assume, perhaps wrongly, but I would assume that most of you caught trains or catch trains. But if you go up the escalators, if you were what is the norm? What is the normal thing to do? Walk on the left and stand on the right. If you were by yourself going up the escalator, would it matter? Why not? Oh, you got the whole place. Okay. So culture is a plural. It's a community in effect. So there has to be other people involved for a culture to actually create and have a foundation. If I'm driving up or standing on the escalator going up, if there's nobody else going on it, I don't need to stand anywhere specific. I can just go my own way. Suddenly now I'm involved in a community and a culture develops. There's no signs in the stations that I can read or see. Maybe I'm incorrect because of my English, but there's no sign saying, keep right, walk left. Sometimes. Okay. Yes, Conrad. Well, we've covered that. only through the culture and the community that's created that, or the community that's created that culture, yes. Okay, so that lays the foundation. According to Isaiah 61:1 and Luke 4:18, a culture of restoration and recovery involves the brokenhearted being healed, captives being released, blind eyes seeing, and the oppressed being set free. The culture of restoration and recovery doesn't just say, let's grab the addict. It's talking about all. All restoration processes begin with a seed, a hope, a desire, or a decision to change. And it doesn't matter how big the seed is. Same as a recovery group. What matters, though, is the soil that it lands in. And I see good soil here. If a hope for or a decision to change lands in a dry, desolate place, no growth is likely to take place. So again, speaking to the strength of the community around you. But if that seed lands in a fertile environment, which nurtures, encourages, and equips, it will probably more than likely put down roots and begin to prosper and flourish. And that's speaking into the culture. Establishing a culture of recovery in a church is much like cultivating that fertile soil. It involves creating the right conditions for an effective process of healing to be worked should a person choose to do so. Important. We need to be intentional about disarming the power that shame holds in perpetuating those self-defeating cycles. Shame, silence, and judgment are breeding grounds in which that addictive, compulsive, and dysfunctional behaviors thrive. Unfortunately, the church has not always had the appropriate tools to help with the escalating issues of addiction. Substance abuse, pornography, mental health, and other forms of dysfunction in society. And I think all of that is too much for one single pastor to deal with. As a result, there's often been a silence in the church around these issues. And I think more so around the pornography issue. To disarm shame, we need to be proactive, take steps towards, take action about breaking that silence. We need to be preaching, talking, and normalizing conversations around the problems facing the congregation without judgment. I like to say that I don't judge people, but oftentimes I catch myself in a space of judging. There's a lady we know, Mapuli Ratifola. She's a counseling psychologist from Gauteng in Johannesburg. And she said at our very first training in Gauteng that if we are not talking about these issues in the church, we run the risk of actually becoming culturally irrelevant. And not just that, if we are not providing sustainable solutions, we may become spiritually impotent. The culture of recovery is represented by a number of positive, resolution-orientated values that are important to uphold and model in our communities. We've already spoken about non-judgment. Other important values include empathy and open-mindedness. And I just want to add here, though, that as I go through this list, or if maybe you're thinking about it in your heads, that It's easy to say I must have empathy and open-mindedness, and it's easy to believe I do, but deep down, do I? Authentic. So empathy and open-mindedness, in which we try to relate to others and understand situations from their perspective, not my bias. Accountability, so in which we are answerable to others for our actions and put measures in place to allow others to help us stay on track. Honesty and authenticity, in which we are real about our own struggles and challenges. How are you, Simona? No, I'm great. Thanks. Meanwhile, vulnerability, in which it's okay to not be okay. Responsibility. Freedom's a big responsibility. We need to take ownership for our own choices. We all have them. We need to take ownership for our own choices, behavior, and progress. Wise counsel. So this is where we seek guidance and feedback from those who have had experience and have gone before us. Redemption, in which we truly believe in God's ability to redeem any situation and celebrate it when it happens. One of the most effective ways of providing sustainable solutions is through group work. I sincerely believe this, seen it. Well-run recovery groups are profoundly effective in facilitating restoration, and in fact, group work is often called cutting-edge treatment or treatment strategy because of its ability to, at one time, simultaneously create an environment where many people can get the help. And many people can make fundamental changes in a relatively short space of time. In the next session, we'll expand a bit further on that. Another way is by integrating impactful personal development programs. So another way to create another strategy. So as we have seen previously, dysfunction is sustained by the underlying maladaptive mechanisms. And recovery requires radical change. Radical change doesn't happen by accident. It requires intentional personal development and purposeful spiritual growth. Slower. Oh, sorry. Must I go back? I can go slower. Désolé. Okay. So as we have seen previously, dysfunction is sustained by underlying maladaptive mechanisms, and recovery requires radical change. Radical change doesn't happen by accident. It requires intentional personal development and purposeful spiritual growth. I've seen this with my son. He's 24 soon, in July. Being young, he didn't understand the term radical change. So it meant actually, first of all, getting rid of all his old friends, to use that terminology, create new ones, perhaps in that now changing interests, or it just meant such a change, not just a 90-degree. So we could say that if recovery is the what, then personal development is the how. And in this area, stagnation opens up opportunities for previous self-defeating patterns to reestablish themselves in our lives with often worse and more dire consequences. Well-crafted personal development programs support and drive the change process by providing those working the program with pertinent self-awareness, powerful knowledge, practical skills, proven strategies, profound spiritual insights, and persistent forward momentum. Again, speaking into culture, what we say, or the words we use, or the body language we convey, speaks life and death, or can. So we need to be aware of how we speak about addiction and about how we speak about recovery and what we declare over ourselves and over others. Negative talk can be extremely damaging and depleting, where positive, life-affirming language instills hope, boosts self-worth, confidence, and calls in the promises of God. We need to learn to choose our words wisely and to steer away from labeling. I know none of you do any of the following: labeling, blaming, judgment, condemnation, both verbally and through body language. In general, we like to avoid the word or the term addict, and rather speak about individuals in addiction recovery, or about myself being grateful to be in recovery. In groups, we encourage the use of I language rather than the use of we or you, and this can help the speaker to take ownership of their own experiences and symptoms. It's also important in a group environment to be aware of interacting issues which may contribute to or be caused by addictive behaviors. About 60%, approximately, of individuals with addictive disorders meet the diagnostic criteria for dual diagnosis. And this just means that it's common for there to be at least one other co-occurring mental health disorder or problem present, such as an anxiety disorder, a bipolar disorder, or a depressive disorder. There may also be unprocessed trauma from childhood. And in a study, it showed that 75% people who battled substance abuse had actually suffered from childhood trauma. And this is also where our scope of practice needs to come in. So left unaddressed, these dual diagnoses, these dual issues, the mental health problems and unprocessed traumas can severely hinder the recovery process. I may not be qualified to deal with them, or you may not be facilitating a recovery group. So it's important to be able to refer these out for professional help and professional consultation. Another interesting aspect is in a marriage situation perhaps, or something like that, but it's helpful to be alert to what we'd call underlying addictive disorders that could be contributing to other relational problems. So marriage problems could be compounded by underlying pornography use. So just going to resolve the marriage, maybe going to a marriage counselor, but without resolving the underlying issue, is just going to cause it to crop up again later. So it's a case of, okay, well, let's get the addiction behavior sorted out. In the same breath, we can work on the marriage. Significant others, or supporters, loved ones, of those with addictive disorders generally experience significant stress and trauma. Sade mentioned her story briefly. She lived in that trauma and stress from a young age. They also regularly adopt maladaptive ways of coping, such as codependency. Has anybody heard the word codependency before now? Just want to get an idea. Hands up. Okay, good. So codependency, enabling, hypervigilance, self-neglect, and becoming sort of caught up. And this is what I ended up being caught up in, but being caught up in this dysfunctional and disordered sort of dance. So we're going through life sort of with all of these sort of things playing out, thinking it's actually pretty normal, but in fact wondering why life doesn't feel so great. These individuals need the support to heal from trauma, free themselves from self-destructive patterns, and exit those dysfunctional relational dynamics. I think we'll get to just now, but the groups are also for families, loved ones involved, not just for the person in addiction. Very important. I severely underestimated the power of group on my life as a supporter, purely because I didn't understand addiction either. And this is why we recommend that recovery meetings are made up of 2 distinct but interrelated groups, one for addiction recovery and the other for supporter recovery. In the supporter recovery group, family members are empowered to walk their own journey of recovery. Often, if it's somebody's first time in a supporter group, hi, my name is Gareth. Yeah, I'm here to support my wife, Tracy. But down the line, it should be, hi, my name's Gareth. I'm grateful to be in recovery. My wife may do her journey and myself mine. And this not only benefits me, but the situation as a whole. Lastly, and I think hugely, we need to be realistic and manage our expectations when it comes to the journey of recovery. So it is a process that takes time. It's not going to happen in 2 weeks. And we must also understand that not everybody will succeed the first time around. Maybe 2, 3 more attempts. And accepting this helps us all to persevere through the process with patience, faith, and hope. Merci. I do believe it's tea break now. So I have a stretch of legs, bit of the loo, and tea. Thank you.
On va prendre 20 minutes environ. Donc, je pense, j'espère qu'il y aura des cookies. Simona, peut-être on peut sortir des biscuits, des choses comme ça, du sucre. Il y a du café, il y a du thé. Si jamais il manque de café, on amènera la machine, mais je pense qu'il y aura suffisant.
chante ça comme une prière.
Que les terres arides se changent en océan de vie dans le nom de Jésus. Dans le nom de Jésus. Que les cœurs brisés
Dès maintenant,
maintenant soient restaurés dans le nom de Jésus.
dans le nom de Jésus.
Dans le nom de Jésus.
je regarde ta sainteté et quand je contemple ta beauté, les choses qui m'entourent ne valent plus rien pour moi. Je découvre la joie de te chanter, de déposer ma vie à tes pieds. Il n'y a que toi qui importe pour moi. Je veux t'adorer, oui t'adorer. Ma raison de vivre, c'est de t'adorer. Je veux t'adorer, oui t'adorer. Ma raison de vivre, c'est de t'adorer.
Beaucoup de ceux qui ne vivent pas voulaient m'expliquer comment vivre. C'est écrit dans un livre, rempli de l'Esprit Saint, donc pas le temps de m'enivre. Et l'évangile c'est chez nous, la vie éternelle c'est chez lui. Et l'évangile c'est chez nous, la vie éternelle c'est chez lui. Quand je regarde au ciel, tout ce que je vois c'est ta gloire. Quand je regarde la mer, tout ce que je vois c'est ta gloire. À jamais je te suivrai, Jésus le roi, le vrai. Tu es saint quand tu descends, je sors dans l'eau. Tu ne mens jamais, tu es le plus fidèle. Beaucoup de ceux qui ne vivent pas voulaient m'expliquer comment vivre. C'est écrit dans un livre, rempli de l'Esprit Saint, donc pas le temps de m'enivre. Et l'évangile c'est chez nous, la vie éternelle c'est chez lui. Et l'évangile c'est chez nous, la vie éternelle c'est chez lui. Tu es parti longtemps, tu reviendras, nous te verrons, on se prépare. Je garde ta parole près de mon cœur. Oh, oh. Et je sais que le monde veut me détourner de toi, mais je ne me bats pas. Tu l'as déjà vaincu pour de bon. Beaucoup de ceux qui ne vivent pas voulaient
Okay, I'm sorry to interrupt your conversations. Désolé d'interrompre vos conversations, mais on va démarrer. Juste pour respecter le temps. Donc, si vous pourrez retrouver vos chaises. Please find your chair again. Merci Emmanuel, merci Natalia. Vous êtes obéissants. Très intéressant, c'est développer la culture de rétablissement. Je ne sais pas si rétablissement, c'est le bon mot pour recovery. Ça va, rétablissement? Qu'est-ce que tu penses, Antoine? Mais de développer cette culture de guérison, de rétablissement au sein d'une communauté, c'est très inspirant. Et j'espère qu'on pourra mettre ça en œuvre, en pratique la saison prochaine. Donc, un grand merci à Project Exodus encore. Thank you very much. Juste une petite précision. Pour le déjeuner, on n'a pas prévu de déjeuner pour vous. Mais on a installé les tables dans le restaurant en haut. Donc, il suffirait de sortir, prendre quelque chose à manger. Et si vous voulez revenir manger ici avec plaisir, si vous voulez rester au soleil, on vous comprend tout à fait. Ça n'arrive que 3 jours par an à Paris, donc profitons-en. Allez, je me repentis. Ça, c'est pas la culture du rétablissement, ça. C'est la culture de l'addiction. Ouais, pardon. Sorry, we're talking about sunshine in Paris. Donc, pour le déjeuner, sentez-vous libre d'aller chercher quelque chose, de revenir, de manger avec nous. On a prévu à manger pour l'équipe de Project Exodus. Donc, eux, ils auront à manger. Mais si vous voulez vous mettre à table avec eux, discuter, n'hésitez pas, vraiment. C'est vraiment l'occasion d'échanger, de poser des questions. Et il y aura un temps à la fin aussi pour des questions. Et une dernière précision. À la fin de cette session, juste avant le déjeuner, on va prendre une photo de groupe. Si vous ne voulez pas apparaître sur la photo, c'est tout à fait OK. Juste ne venez pas dans le groupe. OK? Soyez... Oui, on va mettre un... OK. Over to you, I think.
Okay, me again. We are going to talk more about groups, just unpacking that a little bit more. And another story, because we love stories. I found Jesus at a recovery group. So when I started coming to a Project Exodus recovery group almost 7 years ago, I didn't know God. I hadn't grown up in a home that was an environment that taught God, who spoke God, who lived God. My parents had a lot of troubles, and so that meant that we were brought up in an environment that was very far from God. And one group that we had gone to, my husband and I had, he had just gone on another relapse, and it was pretty much, I was like done. We were 11 years in the struggle, and I was like, I actually can't anymore. And I said to him, well, just come to the group. Just come with me. It was a Wednesday night. Just come with me to the group. And after group, some of the guys that were in our church that used to attend the group from like a spiritual point of view, just to help in the group, said, have you ever given your life to Jesus? I was like, no. What is that? And both my husband and I said the prayer together, and we gave our lives to Jesus. And that Sunday we joined the church and haven't left. And so through recovery, through the power of the group, and nobody preached to me in the group, nobody told me this is how you should do it, or this is the way that God intended, but there was something in the group that others had that I wanted. And I didn't know what it was until somebody offered that to me. And so my relationship with God has grown, and I have a community, and I have a restored family. And it was because of a group that I'd gone to when I was hopeless and helpless. So you might be asking yourself, the question is, what are recovery groups? What have these 6 South Africans come to tell us? Well, 6. Okay, so a recovery group is a regular meeting of individuals run by a team of facilitators who gather around the purpose of helping individuals progress in recovery. So one of the components of recovery, we said, is routine, right? So the groups happen on the same night of the week at the same time for 52 weeks of a year. One of the most powerful groups that I went to was one at Anthem Church on Christmas Day. Because often the guys that are coming to those groups on those holidays and in those difficult times are really struggling. And some of the most vulnerability can be experienced, and the deepest growth can be achieved when they know that I can come to this group and there's going to be people there that will help me. So consistency in the groups is key. So members are able to express and process their experiences in a recovery group, their emotions, their thoughts. Discussions are often orientated around a specific topic. So we could be doing denial in our group. So we could do that through a teaching on denial. We could do that through discussion points on denial. We can do that in saying to the group, okay, share an area in your life where you feel you are in denial. And to not minimize the fact that if I portray some vulnerability as a facilitator, I'm actually leading the way for individuals in my group to feel safe to open up as well. In the Project Exodus recovery groups, the meetings begin and end in a prayer, right? Because we know that that is the reason why we are here and the reason why recovery is possible and achievable for us. And we also start in a small part of worship that really just sets the tone for the group. It settles any anxieties that may be coming into the group, especially if I'm coming into the group for the first time. And it also helps that journey of personal development and spiritual growth. Okay, so who attends a group? Anybody, really. But it is both individuals who are possibly struggling in addiction, individuals who might not know they're struggling in addiction, but just know that they're not living their best lives currently, significant others. Maybe you'll have some parents of a son who they haven't seen in many years. So as Gareth said, we have 2 components. We have an addiction recovery and a support to recovery, which we will unpack a little bit more. It's important that the size of your group does not matter, right? We trust that God will always bring the people that need to be there to the group. We just need to have the doors open. So how we do it at Anthem and most of the groups is that you will start the prayer and worship together. Everybody is in one room. We use the auditorium, so we do prayer and worship, and the chairs are pretty much like stacked around the room, and it will have the potential to get to that. But it started with 6 chairs in the ballet studio. Okay, it's important that I come with the intent of going after the one. If I come to group and only one person is there, or only one person receives the message that I've maybe prepared, I've done my job. Recovery group is not the same as a course. So if I sign up for a course, I have an on-ramp, I start the course, I have a certain number of weeks that I'm doing it, and then I go off and I go and apply what I have learned. A recovery group is something that is ongoing. There's no off-ramp or on-ramp. You will have individuals that will go off, and we hope that they come back. 7 years, still in group every week. Sometimes I'm in group for myself. Sometimes I'm there as a facilitator. It is a non-graduation. There's no graduation from recovery groups. People stay as long as they need. Okay, so who facilitates a recovery group? All of you. No, I'm joking. So a recovery group is not so much about skill as it is about heart. If I have a heart to see lives transformed and lives set free, cool, I can help facilitate. Because skills and techniques can always be learned. Heart is a gifting from God. So the role of a facilitator is to promote conversations, to promote the processing of topics, of experiences, of emotions, and to cultivate a culture in the group. Gareth mentioned that we are a seed that's planted in a fertile soil. We want to cultivate a culture of the group that allows people to feel safe and supported and loved and belonging. Belong. It's important here, again, is that as a group facilitator, I'm not responsible for the recovery of the individuals that come to my group. I'm responsible to ensure that the environment is one that offers recovery. Okay, so some of the things that we can avoid as a facilitator of a group is something that we call frap. And everyone say frap. Don't frap. Okay, so what does frapping stand for? One, I'm not there to fix another's problems. Okay? I'm not there to rescue others from difficult situations. And as somebody who identifies as when I am in group, I introduce myself as, hi, my name is Sade, and I'm grateful to be in recovery from codependency. I love to fix and rescue people. I've been doing it my whole life. But as a facilitator, I've had to learn that there are ways in which I can use the gifting to help others. That doesn't mean fixing and rescuing. So we may want to rescue that person. We avoid advising without being asked. We are not there to say, you should leave your husband, Kerry, because he's done X, Y, and Z. We give our experience. This is what I did in this situation. I'm not there to tell anyone what to do. I'm there to show them a guided path that will help them to freedom. We don't process for others, and we don't project our own experiences. Another important aspect as a facilitator is that I remain within my scope of practice. Right. So I have a heart to see lives transformed. I upskill myself as a facilitator that helps facilitate conversations and grow an environment for vulnerability and safety, but I'm not there to diagnose anybody, especially in an area of dual diagnosis. I'm not there to make treatment recommendations, and I'm not there to attempt to psychoanalyze anybody in the group. We want to remain within our training and within our competence. So in these situations, which you will be presented with in your groups, it's important to have a list of professionals that you can then refer on to. So when we may identify through experience that there could possibly be something underlying, we're able to say, perhaps it would be good if you contacted X. We feel it might be beneficial. Excuse me. Okay, another important part is that I don't want to facilitate on my own. Co-facilitation is incredibly important. One, it avoids me having to think that I need all the answers, because I don't, as a facilitator, need to have all the answers. It means having accountability, an improved sustainability, a greater support. It offers different viewpoints and different experiences. Because if Karen and I were to facilitate a group together, we have very different experiences of the chaos of addiction, right? And together we're able to deepen that level of vulnerability. It offers a greater capacity for observation in group and the management of members. And it's a way of training up more inexperienced facilitators to take on that role as well. So why groups? Since birth, our lives are shaped by different groups. Schools, sports teams, colleges, companies, our friend circles, our churches. We are shaped by groups. The group that I was shaped in growing up was incredibly dysfunctional. And one can wonder, if I was in a different group, would I be shaped differently? But because I found a group that was so welcoming, God shaped me just the way He wanted. We cannot underestimate the significance and the power of groups. They have the capacity for significant personal impact and reinforce positive norms, cultures, and provide an opportunity for fundamental change in people's lives. So Gareth mentioned that when groups are run well, they can be a cutting-edge therapy. Group work has many advantages. It provides us with connection and authenticity, a place to find acceptance and validation, brings me out of the isolation that I've possibly been thriving in for too long. It allows me to experience empathy for what I'm going through. It gives me a space to learn vicariously through others, even if I'm a little shy to share about what's really going on with myself. And it allows me to experience the experience of others, their thoughts and their ideas. As a facilitator, I constantly learn from the group members in my group. I'm constantly developing. I'm constantly growing. And I'm just there to facilitate a conversation. And often I leave just as fulfilled as I'd hoped that anyone joining the group would feel. Okay, so how do we start a group? Just that. We start. Jokes. Okay, so Project Exodus has provided everything that you need to start a group. We have group documents, facilitator guides, literal step-by-step, do this, go here, have this, write that. And what this does is it sets you up to create a culture that I can then prepare to go in and just facilitate. I don't have to think about what do I need to what am I going to talk about this week? Or how am I going to do this? Or how am I going to orientate members properly? You know, all the questions that may be going through your head now, but how do I start the group? How do I get people there? How do I keep people there? What am I going to do? There is launch pads and personal development pathways and so much on offer. We just need a yes. And I think that from just this last night and this morning, that there are quite a few yeses in the room. So there is all the stuff that helps you to set up the group, but then there's also ongoing. So we have what we use is a Google Drive, and we have a plethora, a deep well of resources that are available in many topics with many tools and many teachings. We just need to be brave and cast all our apprehensions aside and say yes to starting a group in a city that has never been done before. And now my computer has frozen. What's after be brave? The end. So, be brave. The computer is telling me to force quit applications. So that's not what we'll do. We want to start. We want to radically change lives. And just looking around the room, we all have the power to change just one life, which changes another. And so you'll have someone like me who rocked up to a recovery group, found Jesus, and life was radically changed. Okay, thank you.
Bonjour. Don't know if I said that right. I know it's after 12. But I don't say bonsoir yet. No, still bonjour or salut or enchanté or... Okay, I'll stop there. All right, voila, apparently. All right, how's it if you're in South Africa? Not really? You didn't really say that? Vanessa, when you were in South Africa, how's it? Okay, all right, okay. So moving on, you've advanced from that, okay. In Hebrews 10, it says, let us stir one another to love and good works, not neglecting to meet together. I just want to catch my translator so that I don't go too fast. Okay, perfect. As is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near. How we exhort one another is we do that in groups. We meet together, we stir one another to love and to good works. And groups are a place where we encourage one another. So what we're wanting in groups is the first thing that we're wanting is we're wanting to be benevolent, which means that we want to have a disposition of wanting what's best for others. Okay, so I can act benevolently by wanting what is best for someone. Whatever I do is because I want the best for that person. So we want people in our groups to feel safe, we want people to feel welcomed, and we want people to feel heard. So in our story, my husband and I ran cell groups for many, many years. We were in cell groups. We ran youth. We were youth leaders. We were worship team leaders. But we never felt safe enough to open up about his problem because we knew that there would be judgment, or we expected that there would be judgment, and because of what had happened when he'd opened up. So he carried this weight for many, many years, and he'd be going through a hard time, and I would know what was going on, And people would be praying for blessing over his life. And I would be thinking, but God, you can't bless. How can you bless? You know? And it just was never a safe space. What we want in recovery groups is we want to create groups that are safe, where people can say, this is where I'm at. This is what I'm battling with, no matter what it is. And so that's very important for us in groups. We want people to feel heard. But in order to do that, we need to have boundaries in place. It doesn't help that we just come to group and everyone can do whatever they want, and we think that people are going to feel safe. We need to have boundaries in place. We need to have boundaries that are adhered to, that define what is appropriate behavior in groups, and that allows for vulnerability. When there are boundaries in place, then I know that I cannot be interrupted, for example, when I talk, or I know that gossiping isn't allowed in a group, I'm going to feel more able to be vulnerable in the group. Okay, when that's not part of the culture, when gossip is not part of the culture, so some of the boundaries that we want to have is we want there to be no monopolizing of conversation. Have any of you ever run a group where there's someone in the group and all they want to do is they want to just talk the whole time? And they do talk the whole time. Are you that person? Anyone been in that group or run that group? Okay, Maria has. Okay, a few of you. Why did you allow them to carry on? Excessive empathy sounds a little bit like codependency. No, it's no. Excessive empathy, that's a new one. All right, okay. Yeah, beautiful, I think. Okay, what we don't want in groups is we don't want people interrupting. Okay, so if I'm opening up my heart, I don't want someone to say, you know what happened to, you know, we just don't, we want to stop people interrupting. We don't want to have cross-talking in a group. So if I'm working with someone and Anton, so I'm working with him in a group and we're processing some things here, and then Darwin starts to talk with, I can't remember your name? Antoine. You start to have your own conversation. No. Okay. We don't want cross-talking. We want one conversation happening in the group. So that is one of the boundaries that we keep in groups. And also, we limit offensive language. So we want people to feel welcome, but we also want to hold language that's life-giving. We want to encourage language that is life-giving. And then, obviously, we don't want to encourage gossiping. So we have got in Durban, we have got a number of groups that happen at different churches at different nights of the week. So, for example, someone can go to Gareth's group that he runs on a Friday night, but they could also come to our Wednesday night group at Anthem. What is said on Friday night at Olive Tree Church has to stay there. It doesn't get brought into the Wednesday night group. Okay, so if someone opens up there, I don't open up. Gareth might be in the group on a Wednesday night. He doesn't open up about what that person shared on Friday night. Okay, so we contain what people have shared. And one of the techniques we do this is by blocking. Anyone heard of blocking? I think the French are maybe a little bit better at this. I have a slight suspicion. The taxi driver, we tried to get a taxi yesterday because we were carrying some big suitcases from the station to here, and he was like, he didn't even say no. He just heard how far we wanted to go, and he just sat down and carried on smoking. He was like, it's not that far, but we had heavy suitcases. But anyway, he blocked in a very different way. But we need to be comfortable, our excessive empathy person, blocking behavior that is not helpful to the group. Okay, so if I'm blocking behavior, remember that I'm not blocking the person. Okay, if they are telling a long story that started in 1972, we can block by saying, let's just bring it back to the future. What's happening right now? Okay, so it doesn't have to be aggressive. It doesn't have to be harsh. It doesn't have to attack the person, but it's blocking a certain behavior. We can use humor. If you're good at humor, use humor. If you're not good at humor, don't use humor. Doesn't work. It does help to know the names of the people in your group. So do get to know them. We always try and I like to be in groups where we go round because I don't always know everyone's names, and I try to remember the names that I don't know in the group, and it just helps for connection. So it's important to get to know names, and as a principal, that's very good. We want to cultivate cohesion in groups. So cohesion is what makes a group attractive. So what makes you guys come back to church? There's some form of cohesion here. If I've listened to your stories, we've got some people here that have been here a couple of weeks, or this is only their second time. We've got some people that have been here for a couple of months, some people for a few years, but there's a cohesion here that makes you want to come back. And that's what we want to develop in groups. We want to develop an attractiveness for people to come back. And that requires boundaries to be in place. It determines how successful a group is. If a group is found to be, if I come to a group and every week it's bonjour, we're going to do this, then we do this, then we do this, salut. And that's the same thing, week after week after week. That's not going to be a successful group because people are going to get bored. We want to keep the group interesting, exciting for it to be successful. So we want it to be dynamic. And we want trust to develop in the group. If people can't trust you, they're not going to open up. And so we need trust to be develop in the group. So how do we cultivate cohesion? One of the things we can do, and you'll learn about it maybe a bit more today and definitely Tuesday night, is we can be consistently inconsistent. Okay, surprise everyone. Okay, maybe your group meets and it's round every week. Let them come next week and the chairs aren't set out. So they come and they kind of don't know what's happening, but it just helps people to think differently and to get out of the rut. So we want people to get out of the rut. We want to embrace progress. Don't think I've always done it this way, so I'm always going to do it this way. Embrace progress. And then be flexible. So for example, you might come to a group and you've planned this amazing teaching for the group. This is going to be a topic night. You're going to be teaching tonight. But then you realize that someone's really taking strain in an area of their lives, and it's actually better to unpack that and work with that. Be flexible, okay? Trust that the Holy Spirit will guide you in that place. And then be creative. We serve a God who is incredibly creative. I look at you and you all look different. Amen? It's a good thing. Yeah, it's a good thing. If we look the same, one of us wouldn't be needed. Okay. We all look different. Our God is a creative God. Be creative in how you run your groups. Okay. Pray for creativity. Okay. And it's amazing. You might think, oh, maybe God will answer me, maybe he won't. If you ask God for creativity, he will give it to you. Especially for our artists at the back there. Okay, we want you to focus. That's Sarah, am I right? Okay. Encourage focus on the here and now. We can't be processing. Groups are not a space to process the trauma that happened 20 years ago. There's a place for that. You might go to a social worker, you might go to a psychologist, you might be referred somewhere else. But groups are what is happening now. How do we best deal with what is happening now? Okay. Everyone get that? Oui? Okay, all right. We want to stay resolution orientated. So this is not about, oh, shame, poor me, I'm such a victim. But it's about, okay, this is the situation I'm finding myself in. How do I move forward? How do I get resolution in this situation? So that's what we're wanting in groups. Remember to redirect long stories and refer. We've spoken about it. If processing is needed, private processing, then refer. But also remember that if you've got a newcomer coming into group, you may want to give them a little bit of leeway. So they might have a long story that they need to share, and you may just need to give them a little bit of leeway. Hello, Luce. Hello. All right. Oh, my word. Did I encourage it? Okay. Hello. Yes, give the newcomer leeway. All right. It's important to keep to time, and I know that this is one of Frederick's passions, is if you say you're going to start, apparently, that's what I've heard. Yes, that was Vanessa that told me that. Okay, am I right, Vanessa? Oh, yes, I'm so glad. But start, if you say you're going to start at a certain time, start at that time, and then especially finish on time as well. Respect people's time. People give up time to come to group. So respect that time. And then avoid, if you're closing, avoid saying 1 minute before the end, does anyone have any questions? Because guess what? That person who has kept quiet the whole time will suddenly have this very complicated question. And then you sit in a predicament of, okay, I can't answer this now. And then everyone else in the group is wondering, well, what would you say to that? Because you're closing it. And if you do answer it, you're going to finish late. So then you just sit in a predicament. So about 10, 15 minutes before you finish, just say, listen, we've got about 10, 15 minutes left. Is there anything that anyone's urgently wanting to ask? That's one of the things you can do before closing, just in order to close on time. It just really helps to say, we've got about 10 to 15 minutes left. Because that person who's been like, oh, no, I don't want to, I'm scared to, knows this is their chance. Okay. And we want to give them a chance to open up. So one of the techniques we can use is summarizing. Summarizing at the end of the group, for me, is just so nice to do. There are a couple of ways you can do it. As a facilitator, I can summarize the key points that happened in the group. Or I can ask a few people to contribute and say, I can choose 2 people and say, what would you say were the most important points in the group? Or my favorite thing to do, and depending on the size of the group, you've got to measure the time you've got left, is to go around the group and say, what is your one takeaway from group tonight? And by doing that, you'll find that you've summarized that group beautifully and you've heard what was important for different people. But when you do that, just say, summarize in 1 sentence. Because otherwise you could get people like really going on a tangent there. All right, Sade touched on this, but as a facilitator, enjoy your role. Enjoy it. If you're seeing it as laborious and it's a duty, you might need a holiday. Okay. Enjoy being a facilitator. It's really one of the most rewarding activities you can do. But remember, you don't need to have all the answers. As a facilitator, I don't need to have all the answers. I don't have the experience that Karen or Conrad or Josh or Sade or Gareth had. My experience is very different. So I can call on others in the group if I'm not too sure about something. And we'll talk about that just now. But it's important as a facilitator to lead the group. Don't just get to the group as a facilitator and say, oh, I haven't prepared again tonight. What do you think we should do? Okay, that's not good leadership. You want to lead the group. You want to welcome people in. Let's pray in. Will you please pray in for us? And then this is the direction we're going. This is what we're doing tonight. So take lead. as a facilitator. Don't just be whatever will be, okay? Have a direction, come with a direction, but still be flexible if you feel that God is moving in a different direction. And as a facilitator, unless I'm teaching on a topic, I'm going to speak often, but I'm going to speak a little bit when I speak. It's differently if I'm teaching on a topic, but I want to encourage people in the group to speak. I want to encourage the group responses. So all I'm doing is trying to be a springboard for other people to speak. So I'm not hogging the group as a facilitator. I hope that word came across well. Hogging. Okay. But what I'm doing as a facilitator is I'm not pushing people to change. I'm creating an environment in which people want to change and their desire to change. Okay. So we want to, as was said, we want to promote interaction and processing in the group. We want to create a dynamic group culture. We want to support group members, and we want to maintain group safety. We've already touched on frapping. We remember what that was? No? Fixing? Rescuing? Oh, it's not up. Advising? Projecting? Processing, projecting. So processing is when someone's working through something and I'm telling them what they should be thinking. Okay, I'm processing, I'm trying to understand. As a facilitator, I'm putting my thoughts about what's going on in their lives on them. Projecting is when I've had a fight with my husband, which never happens in my home. I know it happens in yours, but not in mine. I come into a group and I'm angry with my husband, and then someone opens up to me about what they're feeling about their husband. Guess what I'm going to do if I haven't processed myself? What I'm feeling about my husband is going to change my perspective. It's going to influence my perspective and how I deal with that situation. That is what projecting is. So I take what I'm going through that I haven't processed and I put it on someone else and I see their situation through my eyes, which is not helpful. Okay, guys, my time is running out, so I'm going to whisk through the next few slides. We've spoken about co-facilitation. One of the really nice techniques to do is to boomerang questions. Remember, you're not trying to build a group around yourself as a facilitator. You're trying to build the group around the group. It's the group that does the work. So if someone says to you, what do you think about this? You can boomerang a question back and say, well, what do you think? Brilliant coaching question. And also, it avoids you as a facilitator taking on responsibility that you shouldn't really need to take on. Linking, for example, I spoke about Sade. Her husband battled with substance use disorder. Mine battled with a pornography addiction. So if someone in the group opens up to me about their husband who's battling with substance use disorder, am I going to take on that role? I'm rather going to link it to Sade, who's better equipped and has walked that journey better. And she's more able to speak into it from her own experience. Okay, so consider co-facilitation. Sade has touched on that. Stay in your lane. Know your scope of practice. That has been touched on. Remember that communication happens at 4 levels. So you've got the first level, which is cliche communication. Ça va? Ça va. Have I told you anything about myself? Nah. Okay. How are you? I'm okay. Very cliche communication, doesn't tell you too much. Factual communication, what happened today? This happened. A deeper level of communication is opinion. What do you think about the Olympics happening at the end of July? I'm leaving the country. No, it's just going to be so crowded. So we give an opinion of how we're feeling, gives a little bit of insight to who we are. But the moment I tap into my emotions, the moment I get to the emotional level where I say, I'm really, really not coping. I'm in this situation, I don't know what to do. Suddenly, you've got insight into me. Okay, and that's what we're wanting in group. We're wanting to connect at an emotional level. Because when we connect at an emotional level, behavior is more able to change. And we're more able to influence behavior. All right, we are going to do a bit more of this on Tuesday nights. So I'm not going to, I think I'm just going to touch on 2 more points. We can remember that as a group facilitator, you're there to support. But support can be counterproductive as well. So for example, if someone is opening up about a problem that they have, and I go to you, Francesca, is that right? And she's busy opening up and pouring out her heart. As soon as I touch her, what's happening? I'm interrupting. I'm interrupting her processing. So we had a situation where we were doing training, and this one lady stood up. We were running a group for supporters, and this one lady stood up, and she just broke down. And she said, for 35 years, they've been in eldership in a church. These words have never crossed my lips. She said, my husband has battled with pornography. And she just broke. And because it was a lot of new people were wanting to pass tissues and, you know, that excessive empathy coming out. And Shada and I were there, we were like, no, trying to catch people's eyes, don't pass tissues. And she just let it out. And this thing that she'd been holding for decades, she was just able to release without interruption. And then she got to a place where she went like this. And we knew at that point the processing that she needed to do was done. And we could stand up, and as in South Africa, we gave a hug. Okay, but we didn't interrupt that processing. That is very important. And the other technique I want to leave with you today is a technique of silence. How many of you are comfortable with silence? Comfortable? Oh, you're comfortable. So you don't feel like if there's silence in a group that you need to fill the gap. Any of you feel like that? If there's silence in a group, you feel you've got to say something. Okay. All right. So we're not that comfortable with silence. We need to get comfortable with silence, with the discomfort of silence, because that is when processing can happen. Okay, that is when the deeper thought can happen. If we're constantly filling the gaps, then sometimes the deeper thought can only happen, well, it's not deeper thought, it's only at a certain level. So we want to encourage deeper thought. So in your manuals, there's a whole lot more. Those of you who have manuals, there's a whole lot more techniques that you can learn to develop until they become skills. Okay, so practice different techniques. Abraham Maslow said, if the only tool you have in your toolbox is a hammer, you will see every problem as a nail. Okay, in group facilitation, you will face many different problems. Get skilled with the different techniques that are in your manuals. And in closing, I want to read the scripture. And we urge you, brothers and sisters, warn those who are idle and disruptive. Encourage the disheartened, help the weak, be patient with everyone. In different situations, we use different techniques and we use different tools. So the encouragement is to get comfortable with those different techniques. Thank you. Okay, photo time. And there was a lot of humor about that. I have no idea what was being said, But we are going to do photos, and I think Josh is going to organize us. We're coming up to the stage, apparently. Okay. Big smiles. Bring your smiles. Don't leave them on your chairs.
Cool. Could I have everyone up on the stage and your best smiles on your faces, please? Thank you. Thank you. Okay, you know the drill. Tall people at the back, shorter people at the front. We can have some people on the floor in front of the stage as well. We can bring it in a bit. Okay. Okay, could we have some people from the left, my left side, over to the right side? It's a bit left heavy, or your right heavy. Fantastic, that's cool. Okay, can everyone see the camera? Okay, cool, cool.
Like we don't do this, and it might even mean something not nice.
Ok, les amis, on va faire une pause de 1h30. On revient à 14h30. We come back at 2:30. We're going to break for an hour and a half. Si vous voulez faire une sieste, je sais que la famille Céline n'est pas là, mais bon. Si vous voulez faire une sieste, il y a des salons, des canapés. Servez-vous. Même en bas. Donc, allez chercher à manger. Vous pouvez revenir si vous voulez dans le restaurant. Il y a le jardin de Reuilly qui est pas loin aussi. Donc, bon appétit et on vous voit à 14h30.